As the title says, we're going to be covering some advanced tips today on the How to Win Heroscape video series that I'm doing. This is the second of 3 that I'm doing. The next one will be pro tips to kind of help round everything out. So again, in the beginners How to Win Heroscape, we covered a lot of fundamentals, just stuff that good players have kind of ingrained in the way that they play. Today we're going to be covering some more advanced concepts or ways to play that should elevate the way that you play competitively. So again, some of these are coming from my own experience, but I also reached out to a lot of the really good players in the community that we all know, and they've given some of their thoughts as well. So some of these come directly from them as well. So really excited to share with you what some of those are. So without further ado, let's get to it. Number 1 is maximizing your range. When you're playing with any type of range figure, you always want to make sure that you're shooting from the range value that they use. So if they have a 7 range, shoot from 7 spaces away. If they have 4 range, shoot from 4 away. Rather than shooting from 6 or 5 if you have 7 range, or from 2 or 3 if you have 4 range. The idea there is that you want to force your opponent to have to come to you, right? And you don't want to give them any extra spaces to get to you than are needed. So shooting from 7 away is much more effective than shooting from 6 away, because you're extending the amount of time and spaces that your opponent's gonna have to take to get to you. By using that philosophy, you can do what's called kiting. Kiting is a term that more advanced players use because it's the way that you maximize your range every turn, regardless of position on the board. So regardless of if you're on height or if you're on low ground, even if you're in kind of a normally a not very good spot, if you're still able to shoot at your opponent and force them to not reach you, you've actually won out in getting an extra attack. For example, say you tried to take height to get the extra attack dice, but in so doing, you were only 5 spaces away, even if you had 7 range. Your opponent could still reach you that next turn and attack you, even if you didn't end up killing them. And so kiting, or maximizing your range when you're fighting someone, allows you to get extra attacks without them ever engaging you. And again, extending the period of time before they might actually engage you and get an attack off. So that's the first one. Let's show an example. So say, for example, this is an end game scenario, and it's, Guilty's turn. He's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces away, and he goes ahead and shoots twice. Say the hero troll doesn't die, which is totally possible. Hero troll moves up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, in a game scenario, maybe the troll only has a couple lives left. And so a player, might take height and say, well, he's going to engage me anyway. I might as well get the height attack. 2 attacks at 3 from Guilty should finish off the troll. Now, in most situations, maybe that would be the case. And statistically, maybe it is the best chance of, winning as far as doing wounds goes. And it's not a terrible decision. But when you're kiting, or when you're trying to manage probabilities, it's worth considering still being able to shoot him without him ever being able to engage. For example, if you do 2 attacks and you do blank twice, or you only get 1 skull and he blocks both, then that allows your opponent to engage and potentially finish you off. And so at the end of the game, maybe you say to yourself, oh, those darn dice, if it weren't for those 2 blanks, I would have won it, because with 3 dice and 2 attacks of 3, I should have gotten, 3 skulls, or, a combination of whatever, and killed you. But, a smarter player, a more advanced player might not take that decision. They might, from this position say, well, let's actually put ourselves in a spot where we can still get a shot, still potentially do wounds, and still keep him from engaging us, right? To avoid engagements as long as possible. So, this player might just go 1, 2. Okay, what have they done there? Now, they are still within range, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And a newer player might be like, yeah, but you're on low ground. You know, if he only has 2 attack dice and you're shooting up, and we'll just say he has 3 defense. You know, he has 3 defense plus height. He's rolling 4 defense, and say he has 2 life left or something. He has 4 defense and 2 life left. You know, there's no way he's going to do wounds. It's a dumb decision. But the truth is, you know, it's still an attack, and it's still more effective because he's not going to be able to reach you the next turn. If he only has 5 move, he's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, he still can't reach you. Or even if he's going down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he still can't get to you. Now, he might be able to get to you in the next turn, right? He's trying to close the gap. But what you've done is you've given yourselves 2 additional attacks that aren't going to be returned by an attack, right? And so, I mean, say he even does move in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and uses road 6, 7. You know, then you're kind of in a predicament, because where do you go from there? Now, it would take me some analyzing from this point on to see if you really can't run away at all. But the truth is, maybe at that point, then you do take height. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe you do then at that point get 2 height attacks down. Because the truth is, you just gave yourself 2 additional attacks. If you did that the first time, he could have attacked and maybe killed you. But instead, you gave yourself 2 additional attacks by retreating and maximizing your range, and then maybe you decided to take height and then shoot down and potentially win the game. And so my point is that it's not always possible to do that, right? It's not always possible to keep the maximum range from your opponent and force them not to reach you, because sometimes the game state and the board make it impossible to run away and they can still engage you. But if you do enough analyzing and you know your characters well enough and you force yourself to really maximize your range, you can find subtle spots like that one where he was here and he was still able to get to a spot where he could be within 7 and the opponent could not engage the next turn. And that's a game changer. Number 2 is kind of a build off of one of the fundamentals of last time, was knowing your own unit's abilities. The number 2 is knowing your opponent's abilities and how they plan to use them against you on a particular map against your particular army. I mean, if I'm using rats, for example, I know how I want to use them, but I'm going to be able to beat my opponent pretty darn easily if they don't really understand the complexity and the power that the rats bring. You know, if they look at their card and see, oh, it's only a 1 attack unit, he's not going to be able to do any damage to me, then they don't understand how the rats work, because they're not an attacking force, right? They're simply a screen to get in the way, to lock you up while I do what I need to do. So understanding your opponent's abilities and how they plan to use them is really gonna increase your level of play. And a lot of that comes from experience. Simply reading a card and understanding the verbiage doesn't quite do it. A lot of it comes from experience and just being able to play with as many units, in as many different combinations on as many different maps, and understanding in what types of situations units would be used. Let's actually show an example of that with the rats. So here's going to be a quick example of knowing your opponent's abilities and how to fight against them. So say, for example, I'm Morrow Drones and I'm fighting an opponent that has rats. Now, if I don't understand how rats work, then I'm going to be punished really, really quick. Because, as you know, you engage rats, you attack them, and then they can scatter, which allows them to reposition without taking engagements, and they can scatter units from the start zone. So say we have a few more rats here in the start zone, right here. So when you attack a rat, it allows you to either move up more to kind of get in the way, or move some that are engaged away from getting attacked, so they just keep surviving. You know, you attack one and they run away, or you develop more to just clog up the board. And understanding that that's how rats work is huge, right? And this goes for all units in the game. Understanding how a unit works is huge in knowing how to fight against it. So some players, and this isn't necessarily true for every game situation, but some players just decide, you know what, I'm going to just take the rats head on, I'm going to attack them and, you know, kill them and just hope I can burn through them before, you know, I die, right? That's one way to go about it. Is it the best way? Not necessarily. Rats want to get attacked. They want to be attacked because then it allows them to reposition and clog up the board. So you're allowing the dice to decide what happens by just going and attacking and not making a strategic choice to put you in the best situation. A better way to play against the rats is to understand that rats don't bond. You have to have order markers on them, and their attack is only an attack of 1, so it's not likely they're ever going to kill anything. So your opponent doesn't want to put order markers on them. Your opponent would rather put an order marker on something like a Q10 and shoot at you while the rats clog you up. And while you attack rats, he just keeps replacing them with rats. So understanding that that's what the opponent wants to do, don't attack rats. Literally, don't ever attack a single rat until you absolutely have to. What I mean by that is, say this is turn 1 and your opponent moves out these 4 rats, and say you look at his order markers and they're all on, Q10. Sure, Q10's going to shoot at you, but he's anticipating that you're going to attack his rats, he can fill and replace, and then, keep blocking you. But say you decide, no, I'm not going to attack any of your rats. Say you say, I'm going to run this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Say you start running your units this way. And now your opponent, sure, he can run Q10 over here. Okay, well, sure. Okay, I'm going to, run Q10 here. Now, and sure, Q10's protected and, he's attacking up. But if you defend, great. Because guess now what I get to do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I get to start running in to go get Raylan. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, remember, if he doesn't have order markers on rats, this causes a huge problem for him because his rats aren't providing the screen that he wanted. You're literally ignoring them. And sure, again, maybe Q10 is, attacking you and killing you, and that's all fine. But you're putting your opponent out of position because he expects you to attack the rats, and you're purposefully not in order to engage. So say Q10 attacks again, say he doesn't kill anything, so you charge in, boom. You charge in, boom. You charge in, boom. All of a sudden now, you've surrounded Raylan. You're attacking Raylan, and maybe you take her out, or regardless if you take her out or not, you start getting wounds on her, right? That's not what the opponent wants. They want this rat screen to block and keep you engaged while Q10 attacks. Now, the Q10 player might look at that and say, oh, it was the dice. You sent in all your drones and I blanked 4 times in a row. I couldn't kill anything. Well, you're right. The dice maybe weren't in your favor, but the strategy was the first thing that went wrong, right? The play style, the way that you played the game went wrong, and it went right for this player. This player understood how to counter the rats by not attacking them at all. They found a little loophole, a little weak spot, and they came in. Next round, what have you done? You're forcing your opponent, if they want that rat screen, you're forcing your opponent to put order markers on the rats again. And if you can force your opponent to constantly put order markers on rats, you're in the advantage. Not that you're necessarily going to win, but you have an advantage because you're forcing your opponent to waste turns on a figure that's not likely going to do damage. And that's what you would prefer. You'd prefer them to put order markers on rats and not put turns on a high-powered figure like Q10 who could do damage. So this is something to consider when you're thinking about how do I fight against an opponent? How do I fight their units? Understanding how they want to use the unit and then trying to make a decision strategically to flip it on its head, to counter what they want to do. And so here's a game state example of that.
Number 3, don't be afraid to disengage. Disengaging is sometimes a hang-up for people where they assume that because they're engaged in combat, they can't move or they shouldn't move or it's too much of a risk to move away. And for certain units, that might be the case. Like, for example, if you had minions of Utgar who are really expensive for every single figure, right? 3 figures for 110 points. That's a lot of points going into each figure. You might not disengage with that unit.
Disengage can be kind of a game changer, and it can throw your opponent off the more willing you are to disengage with units. And I mean this more so for heroes than squads. Squads, it is a little bit more risky because you're potentially giving up number of attacks for and killing yourself when you necessarily didn't have to. But I'll show an example here where a couple times actually disengaging with a squad figure is the right call. And so you always have to be open to that fact, right? It's always worth considering in a game situation, in a game environment, is it worth disengaging? Heroes are so much more important to consider disengaging because a multi-life hero, especially if they have 5 or 6 life and haven't been wounded yet, can be extremely powerful when an opponent sends a figure in, engages them, and thinks, I've got him locked up, like he's busy with that unit. All of a sudden to find that you disengage from him and go and smack another unit you really didn't want him to attack. The more you play and the more gutsy you get with using disengage as a strategic option, the more you keep your opponent guessing and playing into your hands. So now for a couple examples. This is a fairly simplistic example where I actually had this situation in a tournament game and I actually ended up winning it. Now it wasn't from this move, but it was a decision that I made. It was actually at a Gen Con game during the assassination tournament, and I was going up against somebody that had a Q9, rats, and a Hydra, and I'd already killed the Hydra. All I had to do was finish off Q9 and the last few rats, and I was running low on squad figures. Now, drones are just an example. I think I had Sacred Band or Legionnaires or something. But again, this is just my example. I had one squad figure engaged, and I think I had a few that were coming in, but couldn't reach Q9 just yet. And I didn't want the rats to be able to hold him off completely. There's a couple pockets, right? He's got an open spot here, an open spot there. And so I didn't have any heroes in the way to to go ahead and disengage or to go and engage Q9. And so I made the decision to go ahead and disengage from 2 rats, and I ran over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to try and engage Q9 to keep him from attacking and taking out my reinforcements while also engaging him and starting to get attacks on him, as well as not attacking rats to keep them from filling the hole. So this was an actual real live game situation. Now, the result, I actually died, right? I disengaged from 2 figures, 50% chance of death, and he got the 1 skull. The squad figure died. But I made that decision because at that time, I really needed Q9 not to waste to ruin my reinforcements. I really needed him to be engaged and start getting attacks on him. And so I determined that 1 squad figure taking a chance of being able to engage Q9 was worth the risk. So I actually took 2 disengages. So this isn't necessarily the right decision, and I'm not saying it was the best decision, but I'm pointing out that it was a decision, and I made it as a strategy to use in the game. And had it worked out, it would have, I won the game anyway, but it could have worked out even better, right? I would have engaged him earlier, wouldn't have lost as many units, yada, yada, yada. So that's one example. For hero disengagements, again, here's just a brief example of what a hero can do. Again, Raylan, who's awesome because she gives +2 defense, and rats, who are super annoying and creating a screen and locking down your opponent. Heroes are great for getting past rats because even though there's this little pocket, a hero can run in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and even if he doesn't, die from it and only takes 1 or 2 wounds, you're still engaging a key figure of your opponent's and now getting attacks. And now rats actually aren't really going to do much. I mean, a rat, if he decides to put order markers on rats and surrounds you, he's blocking other units that you have off to attacking Raylan, but he's not really actually attacking the hero. And so the hero, if he's got multiple lives, can come in, disengage once or twice, maybe take a wound or 2, but it's well worth it when you can disrupt what your opponent is trying to do, right? Your opponent was not expecting you to run in through this gap and engage Raylan and take those disengagements, right? Newer players or players that are, don't really understand the value of disengage might not have thought to themselves,
to just run in and take potential wounds. They might have thought, oh, okay, I've got to come this way on height, kill a rat, then maybe come down. And they would have been fighting the battle against rats the whole game instead of going for the key figure, running in and taking a couple disengages. Very important in high-level games is always considering disengage as a valid strategy.
Number 4, baiting with power glyphs. Now, a lot of it depends on the map and how the power glyphs are set up. A lot of it also depends on what power glyphs they are. But generally speaking, when I play Heroscape, baiting with a power glyph is, in my opinion, you send your units as if you're going to go take a glyph, only to really set yourself up just to attack when your opponent takes the glyph. Now, part of this is really only successful if you know how important a glyph is to your opponent. For example, if I'm running an army that has no D20 abilities and Loden's on the map, Loden, which gives you +1 to any D20 roll, I'm not ever gonna try and grab that glyph. It means nothing to me. Now, if they've got D20 abilities that could actually be quite useful for them, then I know that glyph could be really important to them to capture. Whereas for me, it almost means nothing. So recognizing that's important, because a good map designer will put power glyphs on low ground so that the attacker always has the advantage to knock someone off a power glyph. So baiting your opponent into thinking that either you want it or just using that knowledge to your advantage. Knowing that they want that glyph, you can always send units over there to get height attacks down. And this actually kind of rolls over into my number 5 tip, which is Glyph Control. Controlling glyphs is really actually, in my opinion, kind of an advanced tip. Because, in the beginner section, we covered that, always grab glyphs, right? And that's kind of a fundamental understanding, like glyphs are good, they buff your entire army, grab them, they help you. Kind of a done deal, right? But a more advanced thinking is, how do I maintain control of the glyph? Different parts of controlling glyphs are making sure that you have a unit to replace a unit if it dies, and also trying to anticipate when there's an initiative switch, because a player attacking a powerful position or a powerful glyph is going to try and kill the unit off the glyph at the end of the round. Well, you try and kill it at any point during the round, right? But kill the figure off the glyph at the end of the round so that if they win initiative on the next turn, so turn 1 of the next round, they could then take that glyph and get the bonus, which is one really powerful way to do glyph control when you're attacking someone who has glyph controlling a glyph. The other piece too is using bonding heroes. Bonding heroes are great to run in and kill someone off a glyph, and then taking the bonded squad and moving it onto the glyph. So because then in your turn you're killing the figure off it and taking it. If you don't have bonding squads, it's a little bit harder because you kill the figure off the glyph, and if the other player's done well, they'll just replace it with their own unit the next turn over. So let's show how that looks.
So let's just go ahead and say that this is an end game scenario with 2 armies and Wannock in the middle. This is a way that you can bait your opponent into grabbing a glyph. Now, maybe you purposely didn't grab that glyph because, you've got rats in your start zone who are great soakers for Wannock damage, right? Wannock is a really powerful glyph because it's a 95% chance of damage on an opponent's army. Now, that's it's almost guaranteed, right? So the neat thing about that, though, is, good players won't be fazed by the power of Wannock, right? In fact, they would rather, let you take low ground and kill off a rat or wound a Marku and then get a height attack on you than you taking a better position. So in this game, this army doesn't really care if Wannock goes, because Marku can take a wound and Marku can even heal himself again. And they don't really care because we've got a couple rats that aren't going to get activations anyway, so they can just soak damage. They've got one big main hero that, can probably soak damage too. This army, on the other hand, maybe already has a wounded Raylan and only has a few squad figures left. So every casualty to this army is extremely important. So it's not a good thing for them to take wounds. So for them, they might think that they need to take Wannock in order to do damage or in order to avoid taking damage. Whereas for this army, you're more than willing to bait them into taking that Glyph, because then you can take height and smash them. But also consider this. Say this army is saying, no, I'm not going to take low ground, because even if I get Wannock, he's just going to put it on Marku or destroy a rat. Sure, great. But then what happens? This guy comes in, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he grabs it on his turn. Because remember, this army is going to hurt much more on a Wannock, and it's a 95% chance of success. So they're either going to put it on a Raylan or put it on one of the last squad figures. And if he's has multiple lives and, isn't really hurt too bad, he's not going to be too worried about taking, tons of damage in the end game, but he's guaranteed a 95% chance of dealing wounds to an army. So this is a way that you can kind of bait an opponent into either grabbing the Glyph or not grabbing it, and it's still coming out in your favor. This army, if they grab it to keep you from grabbing it, you can just put damage on your rats or Marku. On the other hand, if they don't grab it and they decide to take the, like a height position and just reposition, then you can go in and grab Wannock to force them to have to wound one of their higher profile figures or one of their last few squad figures.
Initiative switch. Initiative switch is one of the most powerful power plays that you can have in Heroscape. And it becomes more powerful the closer the game, and when you set yourself up for a good initiative switch. And that's pretty general terminology. So if you don't really know what that means, then that's why I'm here. I'm sharing that with you. So an initiative switch is, there's 3 turns in a round. Turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. Then there's initiative, and then the next round, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, then initiative. Initiative switch is when a player that won initiative for this round over here loses initiative on the following round. And the reason why that's important is because if I win initiative here, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and then I win initiative again on this next turn, we've continued to alternate, right? I go my turn 1, my opponent. I go my turn 2, my opponent. I go my turn 3, my opponent goes. If I win initiative, I go again right after my opponent. The power play is when I go 1, my opponent goes 1, I go 2, my opponent goes 2, I go my turn 3, my opponent goes turn 3, then my opponent wins on the following round to start, right? Because then you've done 2 turns in a row. An initiative switch is when you're able to take 2 turns in a row. Consider the impact of this, right? Especially for something like bonding squads like dwarves, heavy gruts, Knights of Weston, who get to activate 4 figures and bond with a hero. That's 5 activated figures and potentially 5 attacks. And if you get an initiative switch, that's potentially 10 attacks you have to deal with without ever taking a turn, right? And that is why an initiative switch is so powerful, because you've taken your turn twice in a row without your opponent really being able to do anything. I'm going to show a quick example of what I mean.
So here's an example of the power of the initiative switch. So say, this player has a really good setup, defensive wall, Raylan is protecting all of these drones, and you've got Q9 behind that's just ready to rock and roll, right? Ready to shred the opponent. Now, again, this is the last turn. So say this army won initiative and it's turn 3 for these guys. Now these guys set themselves up defensively, and they said, you know what, I'm good. I'm in a position that can't be penetrated, right? But you have to always consider how powerful an initiative switch can be, because if this army, we'll just say, runs up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they pound this guy in, say they run this guy up, pound that guy in, and say they run this guy up and pound that guy in. Okay, so in a perfect world, right, if you're planning for initiative switch, say this army is saying, you know what, it's turn 3, I'm going to play to the initiative switch. I'm going to try and bust through this screen so that if I win initiative on the next round, I can then take care of business, right? I can start getting into Q9 and Raylan. So here's what would happen, right? Say that guy dies. say that guy dies, say that guy dies. Then all of a sudden you are in a really precarious situation for this army because you've got your front line that just got taken out. If this army then wins initiative, that's 6 attacks that this army is going to get before this army gets to do something, because now this one's coming in and engages. Now this one comes in and engages. Now this one swings around and engages. Now all of a sudden you've got an army in your back line attacking figures that weren't supposed to be attacked in the first place. And so now you're in a world of hurt because, you know, your defender is being attacked, your, you know, high profile ranged unit is getting attacked, and these guys didn't get anything. Now, if there wasn't an initiative switch, and say these guys, you know, one initiative still, you know, these guys could run in and start blocking, right? They could run in. But what that does is that also opens up holes over here for these guys to run in. So at the end of the round, I'm not saying in every situation it's right to be over aggressive, but at the end of a round, if you had originally lost initiative and you're closing out the round, it's sometimes a good strategy to push a little bit into your opponent, to push a little extra, to be a little bit of aggressive, because if you win initiative, you're then putting the pressure on your opponent. Because, yeah, now even if they win, they still try and replace, it opens up a lane. Or if you win, those guys are back over here and you can then charge in and take those guys out.
All right, so number 7 isn't so much a strategy in playing Heroscape as it is a mentality. And that's adopting the idea that this is all my fault. And what I mean by that is Heroscape is a game of strategy and a game of luck. I mean, there are dice involved. But the true good players find ways to manage the odds, right? And what I mean by that is recognizing, you know, that dice can't be controlled, but they can be managed. And, you know, newer players or players that, you know, just chalk, you know, success or failure up to the dice kind of miss the boat on how to be a better player. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some games where, you know, Negaxa Mind Shackles 3 figures. You know, who would have seen that? Who would have seen that you rolled 23 times and the game just kind of fell apart, right? So, of course, there are situations where the dice were more giving, I guess you could say. But generally speaking, and I say generally as in almost all the time, you can look back at a certain situation and realize that you kind of put yourself in a bad spot. You have to continually consider when your opponent is having success or beating you good, or they seem to always know what the next move is, or they seem to just be better than you. You have to consider that maybe, you know, it was your fault. Maybe it wasn't the dice, because honest truth is it likely wasn't. There's probably a spot where you could say, where if you go back and analyze the game situation, you can recognize that, yeah, you didn't put yourself in a very good spot. You didn't maximize attacks. You overextended your units, or maybe you, you know, just didn't make a very good play. And then you're leaving it more up onto the dice to decide the game for you. For example, if you move a unit onto low ground that doesn't necessarily need to be onto low ground, or it's just not strategically a sound position to put him there, and then you die the next turn, I mean, you only have really to blame yourself. You gave your opponent the advantage, right? Or maybe at the end of the game, kind of like I mentioned earlier, if you have 7 range, but you're only shooting from 5 spaces and your opponent engages you and kills you, well, why didn't you shoot from 7, right? Again, you always have to have this mentality that you're not perfect and the dice will be the dice. And you really shouldn't blame the dice, because it's a disservice to you and your ability to recognize how to be better. And it's also a bit of a disservice to the other player. If the other player is a really good player and they played well and strategically they just cooked your goose, I mean, it's kind of
a diss to them for them playing a really good game and you just chalking it up to the fact that it was just the dice and it had nothing to do with the player. Earlier on in my playing, I actually did that a lot. I said, oh, it's just the dice. Oh, it's just the dice. And it's easy to say that. And occasionally I still do. But, you know, as you begin to play with good players, you begin to really respect their ability to be strategic and make good decisions. And when you put yourself in a good spot, in a good strategic sound position, dice tend to be much less swingy, I guess you could say. Again, there's always those times you just blank 4 times in a row and everything you didn't go right. But because dice are based off of, you know, probabilities, if they're rolling according to their ratios or according to their probability, then, you know, you can set yourself up to manage the times that it doesn't go well, or the times that, you know, your opponent does roll really well. If you set yourself up defensively well enough, or you set yourself up in a position where they could only ever get 1 or 2 attacks, then you've actually done really well in managing if their dice get hot. Again, the mentality that your failures and your successes, but mainly your failures are your fault, helps you always kind of look and say, what did I do wrong, right? So after a tournament game, when someone just totally owns you, you know, going back and analyzing the game situation and where certain things flipped or went downhill really helps understand how to improve in the next game, or, you know, in the future. So for those of you out there that tend to blame dice, that tend to get mad at the randomness of Heroscape and the probability of dice, I would say please try to avoid doing that the next time you're at a tournament or the next time you're playing casually with friends. Not a lot of situations that I can really show on a battlefield to help you understand that. Again, it's more of a mentality that you have to have about Heroscape, but it's the mentality that drives every good player that I've seen or played with, and that's what separates the good advanced players from kind of more beginner level players, is the ability to critically think and analyze game situations when they go poorly and when they go well. Number 8 is learn to protect valuable units better. There's a lot of really good units out there. Some of them are more central to armies than others. For example, if you have Torkelna and a bunch of Nagrubs, Torkelna is 220 points. You have Kato Katsuro, again, that's kind of the center of the army. You have Kyurk the Elementalist as well, that is kind of the center of the army. And so you have a number of figures that you have to keep alive and you have to position correctly in order for you to be successful. Because if they die, it's essentially a game over. But that's more obvious, right? That's more obvious that those figures are kind of the crux of everything you're trying to do. What I'm talking about from an advanced player's mindset is more the understanding the value of a character in a certain game and in particularly in your army. For example, Burksa on his own is good, right? He's worth the 50 points. He can do some cool things, but he's 3 life and 3 defense, which means, you know, you get engaged once or twice and get whacked, he probably goes down. But in the right army, he becomes much, much more valuable. In a Roman Legionnaires army, he actually bonds with the Roman Legionnaires, which is incredible. And his value goes substantially up. His points are 50 points, but his value is far beyond those 50 points. Because of the threat that he provides and the versatility of that build. For example, Roman Legionnaires are, played well, are slow and turtly, right? They are strong when they stay together. They get extra defense, and they're really good at just kind of slowly turtling through the map and just kind of choking things down and protecting, their units because of their shield wall. But players sometimes don't play that, right? Sometimes with his 8 move, they'll run him out to the front, and they want to get height to get the extra attack dice and to get paralyzing stare and get tons of attacks in
and do lots of damage? Yeah. Does he have potential to do 4 wounds in a turn? Yeah, he does. He can get height, he could get a paralyzing stare, he could roll max skulls. Is that likely? Right? Managing the odds, not very likely, right? His value is so good if played right, but if you run him out into the front where he could get engaged and get knocked out after 2 or 3 attacks, you haven't played it correctly. He brings so much value that playing him right, you should always be limiting how many attacks he's taking by the way that you're setting up your game situation.
So here's an example of the value of Miberxa with the Roman Legionnaires. So in this game situation, we've got the Legionnaires who are just clogged up in the middle here, defensively in a really good position, taking on some Durgreth Ravagers. Now, because they're slow and kind of sturdy, they just kind of sit and they just kind of lock things down. The additional value that Miberxa adds is as a bonding hero, Miberxa can shoot from all the way back here. Miberxa doesn't need to come up here. He doesn't need to come up and grab this height and have a chance of getting engaged and being attacked. He can sit back here and plink away shots. An attack of 3 is great. It doesn't have to be, a huge attack to still do wounds. All it takes is 1 skull to go through for a squad figure to die or for a hero to take a wound. And every wound is still an advantage that you have against your opponent. And so while we all love the height attack and we all love his 8 move getting height and attacking down, he can still shoot from 6 away, and there's no way they're going to get him, right? I mean, even if you had a few more squads of Legionnaires kind of clogging this up, they would never be able to reach him, and he could just continually shoot away at them. In fact, he could even run up and start shooting away at the reinforcements in the back, because these guys can handle the guys up front, so he can shoot reinforcements. Or say he's hanging back and he does shoot, this guy up front. Maybe they take out him, and then maybe you push the envelope, right? Maybe you start pushing the formation a little bit to start gaining ground on the map and gaining map control. So consider that as well, that certain units by themselves can be good, but in the right armies and played the right way, their value goes way up if you know how to use them correctly. Also consider if he has 8 move running over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? He could take height over here, right? He could run all the way over here. Then you're forcing your opponent to say, well, do I want to, keep fighting this, really good position here? Or do I want to go and run after him? Now, this is actually kind of a bad example because with my setup, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or actually he was here, 1, 2, 3. I think he could get here. So that's not a good idea because then you're allowing him to be engaged based off of my setup. But my point is say you had, a few more guys over here, or say the setup was actually this way, right? Say it was something like that, and say he was, down here, running all the way over here with 8 movement from this position, running with 8 movement onto height and then attacking down this way is incredible, right? And then say this guy over here is trying to run to go chase him down, right? Well, you can keep repositioning him. You can keep moving him back and forcing your opponent to chase after him. And with 8 movement, he can go anywhere you want and keep your opponent continually guessing, all the while plinking shots inside. So again, this is just one example of how a value of a unit and protecting the value of that unit is immense, right? He's a 50-point hero. Your opponent is quickly going to realize that that hero, Miberxa, is well worth more than 50 points if you play him right. In fact, they'll even think he's broken. I've seen players use, 50-point heroes like Miberxa to perfection, and you get so frustrated because you realize that they understand how to use that unit and to get the most value out of that unit. And not only that, they know how to protect that value, right? He's got a lot of potential, but if you let someone come in and engage him and whack him, that's not protecting the value of that unit. And so you always need to consider the value of a unit and make sure you're protecting that value, specifically more so with heroes, throughout the course of a game.
Number 9 is that you need to let superior range and superior movement determine where the battle happens. And this goes for both sides. Specifically, if you have the faster or better range units, use that to your advantage. Recognize that if you have 7 or 8 range and your opponent only has 4 range or no range at all, recognize that you have the advantage, meaning you determine where the battle's going to happen.
because you can reach your opponent far before they ever reach you, and they have to chase you if you set yourself up right? If you just stay in the same spot and wait for them to come to you, it's one way to play it. But if you constantly shoot and then reposition and shoot and reposition and shoot, kind of kiting, like I was talking about before with maximizing your range, then you're forcing your opponent to come to you, and you're determining how the battle is played. So when you know you have the advantage of longer range, you can determine where the battle happens. The other thing is, if you have superior movement, you determine the battle as well, because you're going to be moving faster, meaning you can get around corners, you can get up onto height faster, you can grab a glyph sooner, or repositioning, right? You can always reposition faster or farther than your opponent can. When you sit down to a game, know who has higher range, know who's faster, and be able to determine where on the map the conflicts are going to happen. Also, if you are the army that's slower, or you are the army that has less range, and try and anticipate how your opponent's going to use that. Try and anticipate where on the map your opponent wants to go, and that will help you know how to prepare for that. And again, that's more of a knowledge thing than it is a, here's an example in practice on a battlefield, because that's something you just need to know and anticipate when you sit down to a game. And to wrap this all up, for number 10, it's engagements are good. There are very few situations where, as the attacker, you don't want to engage an opponent. They do exist. There are units that punish you for engagements, but sometimes it's inevitable. But again, as a kind of a baseline rule, as an advanced tip, engaging an opponent is really powerful. And being able to engage multiple opponents is even better, right? Because it creates a certain amount of control in that location of the board. It also limits what your opponent can do. So that's kind of hard to just talk about. So I want to kind of show you an example of situations where engagements are good and can be even better by engaging multiple figures. So here's an example of why engagements are important. Say, again, we're working with some Roman Legionnaires and some Durgith Ravagers, and we're trying to get to Raylan, right? We are having a hard time getting through the defense of the Roman Legionnaires, and so we're trying to get our way around this army into Raylan. Say this guy's coming around this edge, this guy's starting to come around this edge, we got a couple guys threatening the middle. Now, this is extremely important because engagements are a way to keep your opponent from reaching your targets. Now, right now, we'll say it's the Roman Legionnaires' turn, and they have to make a decision on how to protect against the Durgith Ravagers. The Durgith Ravagers have done a good job of putting themselves, in a threatening position, but they're still trying to fight an uphill battle against Roman Legionnaires. But the Roman Legionnaires need to keep the Durgith Ravagers from getting multiple engagements on Raylan. So one way you could do this is, take care of this guy and say, well, let's move this guy over here. Let's move this guy up. And again, I'm not giving examples of the perfect decision. I'm just kind of going on the fly here. But it keeps this guy engaged. They're still getting their shield wall bonus, and they're still in Raylan's aura, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're still getting buffed. Now, over here, we don't like this height position, right? Because that's giving them extra attack. So if we go up and bump up 1, and we bump up 1, 2, what that's done is that's engaged and locked down this position here. It's forced this guy to have to stay there or take a disengage attack, right? Because before, right here, this guy could have cleverly run up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, jumped down 5, and then jumped down 6 to engage Raylan, right? And then this guy could have run around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to engage Raylan, and that would have been really detrimental because that's 2 attacks that are now coming to Raylan. So repositioning right here, what it does is it engages this guy and forces him to take a disengage if he wants to engage Raylan, but also it forces these guys to engage here and take disengagements if they want to do the same thing. And so engagements are a way to lock down your opponent. Same thing with this guy. This guy's kind of stuck now. The other thing too is that you are still being threatened by this guy. So moving here, sure, this guy can come in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or if he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? He can go there. So that's concerning, right? You're gonna have to deal with that. Again, in a different game situation, maybe you, are able to set up better, and that doesn't happen. But my point is originally with that previous position, he could have gotten 2 attacks on Raylan, but you limited his ability to attack with those 2 figures by shifting your units into engagements that forced him to basically stay put.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for sitting through all that. I know that there was a lot of talking in terms of explaining kind of how these tips operate and even showing examples on the board. But hopefully that was helpful, kind of just conceptually thinking about some of these mentality things, as well as seeing some of these tips in practice on a board in a game state. Really, truthfully, all of these just come from experience. The more you play, the more you begin to see these things in practice on a battlefield in a certain situation. So even though these are kind of general top 10 advanced tips, again, trying to remember them and apply them in practice while you play truly will elevate the competitiveness and the success that you have in playing Heroscape. So how to win Heroscape advanced tips, here they are. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time.